But there are some final thoughts I have going into this game and our final show and our final prep show before LSU takes the field on Saturday versus South Carolina. Now, it was announced today that Chris Fowler, Holly Rowe, and Kirk Herbstreit are going to be on the call. I got to be real with you. I really think Herbstreit's one of the best in the game, whether y'all like it or not. You can love him, hate him. I think that what he sees from the booth and how he reacts to things is really good. Glad that Herbie is on the call for LSU versus South Carolina. But there are 4 massive question marks that I have that has nothing to do with X's and O's. There were a lot of X's and O's that you and I talked about, and there's some that we'll discuss here tonight as well that we talked throughout the week. And we talked about that a lot in the Keys to Victory. We talked about that a lot on Monday and Tuesday. But tonight, there are 4 main questions that I have going into the week versus South Carolina. Number 1, how do players respond in a must-win situation? You know, I thought that last season, as an example, the offense every single week showed up when it mattered. Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas showed up when it mattered. Now, you can say, well, Blake, what about Florida State? Well, some points you got to, against good teams, you got to play defense and able to get your quarterback the football back so that he can go out there and make plays. But do you feel that in the air? It's tension. The tension that's in the air for this week that you have that probably in the beginning of the season you didn't think that you were going to have going into this football game. Now, maybe you're like me, maybe you're not, okay? But I feel like you could cut the tension for this game with a butter knife. I think it is that intense of how it's going to be in South Carolina that will and is I'm telling you, it will be a hostile environment. And I got to tell you something, man. Even though the Storm didn't do much damage, it did damage, but you get what I'm saying. It won't affect LSU enough to where it's having to really overcome adversity. Guys, you go there this week after having a hurricane that came into town, having to adjust your schedule, coaches having to adjust their schedule, having a head coach that's never gone through one before. You know, I start asking, what do the players do with all of this that's been going on in what is a must-win situation? You know, and what college football has taught us, and sports in general, and any sport, what has it taught us when you're in a tenure with a coach, especially like a guy like Brian Kelly going into year 3? You really start seeing how players feel about a guy when they start playing with effort and enthusiasm and going out there and wanting to make statements in must-win situations like this. Even if you lose, how do you go out there and perform in the effort department? Because there's only one thing that any of these guys can control. The only thing that they can control is their effort. You know, I remember my brother a long time ago, because he's been in business. He's owned his own business for well over a couple decades, or maybe a decade and a half. And he's been highly successful. And he'd always tell me the old business cliche, control what you can control. And it's funny because when we look at sports and we think that some of this stuff is coach speak, like control what you can control. And that's what LSU's got to accomplish this week. Just control what you can control, being focused, locked in, and determined, and go out there and play for a coach who's quite honestly had your back in a lot of situations on bad performances that you've had. How do you respond in a hostile environment? So the biggest question that I have, I use this analogy a lot. I used it week 1 and during the entire offseason when it came to USC. Lincoln Riley and all the Rudy Papu that people were putting on his name about he sucks, he's not a good coach, he didn't fix anything, his quarterback stinks, he stinks, he doesn't like recruiting, he can't turn that place around. Dog in a corner. He was a dog in a corner. And I tell you this every time that we're in this situation. Me personally, what am I going to say? I don't like going up teams when I feel like that team is a dog in the corner. And I feel like, and which gives me some positivity, you're that dog in the corner. It's time to go out there and take it to somebody's ass. Now, South Carolina did that, and they did all that they did last week was control what they could control. They absolutely obliterated Kentucky. The season's not even over, and I know that a lot of us have said, well, Blake, Kentucky's offense is Rudy Papoo. I hear you now. I can hear some of you in the 337 right now. Couillon. That offense is trash. It might be trash. Or this South Carolina defense is really good. We're about to find out here on Saturday. So, number one, guys, play inspired, play with focus, play with energy. Guys, I feel like if you do that and you don't put on the performance like you did at some points last week and you're just going through the motions, I think you're going to win this football game, and I think you can win it by double digits. Number two, what do we, I say that, let me ask you this question. I'm going to stay with me because I'm going to tie this into LSU, especially from last week. What do we make of teams around the country playing Rudy Papoo? Well, Blake, who's playing Rudy Papoo? I look at Oregon the last 2 weeks. Oregon's played 2 teams from the state of Idaho, no Udo, but they played 2 teams from the state of Idaho, and they had to have a field goal at the end to beat Boise State last week, and they only beat Idaho by 2 scores. What do we make of these really talented teams struggling out of the gate? Is that LSU? Do we look at teams now and say, well, maybe, man, with all of this turnover, which Oregon had turnover, Notre Dame had turnover, and thinking about Notre Dame, they lost to Northern Illinois last week. You had massive turnovers. What do all 3 of those teams have in common? All 3 of their quarterbacks are in the NFL. I look at the Texases of the world who, what do we make of Michigan, who they blew out last week? I think there's something to be said about replacing as much as you had to replace. But there comes a part in time, usually around week 3, week 4, that if you aren't starting to hit a little bit of a stride of who you are as a team, then, you're a month into the season. You've already kind of month into the season, if we're going to be honest, if you want to talk about fall camp. But I look at LSU and say, well, look, man, there's been other teams that are highly talented across the country. Kentucky on defense included in that one as well. A lot of really good teams that have struggled out of the gate. You can't go in there into Columbia and struggling. Now, what's interesting is I don't know if you'll go in there and struggle. I do think that you're better than some are leading on. I do think that I and others, and maybe you're putting a little bit too much on this game. But considering how teams have looked the last 2 weeks, and I don't really care that South Carolina was on the ropes against Old Dominion. What I care is that they blew out a really good what I thought was a really good SEC opponent that had a really good defense. Number 2, what do we make of teams struggling? What I would say is I think when you lose as much as some of these teams have lost, Notre Dame, LSU, Oregon, Michigan, these high brand value names, it seems as if some of them have been a little sluggish out of the gate. The only one that hasn't been sluggish, and I would even say maybe they were a little bit sluggish and you let them off the hook. Actually, I will say that they were sluggish out of the gate and you let them off the hook was USC. And they had a number 1 overall pick that they had to replace. Something that we're going to have to really keep our eyes on as the season progresses. Number 3. So I told you in the beginning of the show that I was going to call out a position group. I'm not going to call out names, but you all know who's in there. And I don't think, when I say I'm going to call this position group out. We had a super chat in here earlier about this and was asking about the running back room. Brian Kelly is not wrong when he says that you have not seen many favorable boxes, and what most coaches mean, guys, they don't care if you're inside the hatches. They mean a lot of guys in your running lanes. What do you make of teams doing that, trying to take away the run that you are trying to do and things that you're trying to do in the running game versus like what Brian Kelly said and admitted today? Guys, I'm going to call out the running back room. I know that you've had some issues, okay, along your offensive line at times. That's got nothing to do with breaking a tackle, getting outside like we saw John Emery in week 1, or hitting a hole that maybe the play wasn't designed to be there for and hitting it right up the middle and having a massive gain. But guys, I'm going to call out this running back room. You got to run and play determined this week. Guys, every yard is going to be crucial. Now, I think teams and especially us forgot about this. You don't have a Jaden Daniels on your roster. And what he did, and I told you this even in 22, when you can run the football the way that he does, he separates himself from everybody. That's why he's the rookie of the week in the NFL. But I don't mind 4 yards in a cloud of dust. Because you get 2nd and 6, you run it for 4 yards again. That doesn't bother me. You got to stay with the running game. Guys, I look at Georgia as an example in week 1. Georgia was in a dogfight with Clemson in week 1. Now, that Clemson defense is really good. You can't take really anything from them. But what did they come out and do in the second half? Play action, run the ball. Play action, run the ball. Play action, run the ball. Because what Georgia doesn't care about is style points. If they get 4 yards of rush, they love it. Because they're going to come right behind it and hit a play action, and you can't do anything about that either. Guys, they had a true freshman in week 1 that they lined up out there and said, here you go, youngin. Here you go, youngin. Youngin to the right, youngin to the left. And we're going to knock your shit in the dirt. Georgia runs the football effectively enough throughout games that it makes teams in midway through the 3rd and 4th quarter sound like Shannon Sharp on Instagram Live. So I know that you want this running game to get going. I know that you need explosive plays. But at some point, yes, running backs got to make some guys miss. Run hard, run determined. And when you continue to pound, probably not a good analogy while we just mentioned Shannon Sharp, but if you continuously are pounding that rock, guys, you will break a defense's will. Now, Dylan Stewart, I would assume after 2 weeks, most people would think is going to be a freshman at minimum All-American. What does he do when you run right at him with Emory Jones and Will Campbell? So what? You're getting 4 yards in a cloud of dust. Guys, line up and run that thing. And I promise you, they will start sounding like Shannon Sharp on the Instagram Live video. Here's another thing that I want to mention. I got called out. Well, Blake, you said that they were going to run against USC. I said, no. If you go back and listen, what we said is after halftime, you're going to have to stay with this running game. John Emery had 61 yards in the second half on 10 carries. So while I do think they got way too conservative, doesn't mean that in the second half you did not have success in the running game. Running backs, Caleb Jackson, Josh Williams, Caden Durham, put your head down. Run somebody's shit right over. You got speed at running back. Caleb Jackson's got speed. Get him out there. And even if it's not technically a run, throw Josh Williams the football in the flat. You did it all offseason. I saw you do it 100 bajillion times in fall camp. I hadn't seen you do it once this year so far. Not once. I think your running back's got to play better. I think your interior offensive line's got to be play better. I agree with Brian Kelly. I agree with Carter. I don't think you got out physical. I think you had too many people in the box, but there are going to be times that you got to line it up and run it right at them. What running back can break through and be good? Say this, man. I'm going to pre-look into next season. When you got speed at running back like Harlan Berry, that guy will be a difference maker for you day one. Got to run it at him. Like I was asked, Blake, what do you think about Caleb Jackson being 9 of 19 in the last game? Nothing. You know why? Because stats mean nothing on context. The last carry that Caleb Jackson got was a 7-yard gain where he broke 2 tackles right up the gut. At some point, you got to continue to give that man the rock. I promise you he's going to bust one off. We saw it all camp. Guys, he ran. Here's what the weird thing is. When they kept giving him the rock in camp, dude kept busting long runs if you gave it to him long enough. He's a workhorse. You can't spell him like that. You can't spell him. You got to get him the rock and got to get him touches. All right, number 4. What happens if LSU wins this game? Now, I know what some of you LSU fans are going to say, well, we're supposed to win this game. And you're not wrong. You are supposed to win this game. You're a 7-point favorite on the road in the SEC college game day. You're one of the biggest brands in college football. Yeah, you are supposed to go up to South Carolina and win this game. But I've told you what I think, how I'm going to perceive this win. How I'm going to perceive this win with all the adversity, with everything that was going on, going up to a team that showed last week that they can be a dominant team on the road. And we don't give South Carolina enough credit for what they did last week in Lexington, which isn't necessarily a completely easy place to play. So, what I would say is, if LSU wins, in case you didn't hear me when we've mentioned it this week, I'm taking this like a top 25 win. LSU goes on the road to Williams-Brice. I am taking this like a top 25 win. Maybe even a top 20 win because of just how much adversity that you had to overcome throughout the week. Here's something that we hadn't talked about, and Harry Wilson brought this up. No, Travis, ain't no pause. Don't pause me. Ain't my fault that Shannon Sharp was on Instagram Live huffing and puffing like he was trying to blow somebody's house down like he was the big bad wolf. Ain't my fault. Y'all gonna miss me on that. Ain't no pause. Anywho, we had a question in here from Harry Wilson, a $5 super chat. He says, you said most important game for BK. I think it is. Tell us what you think if they win or lose. I told you all week what I think what's going to happen if they win or lose, or if they win. I hadn't told you what I thought what happens if LSU goes up there and lose. You're in trouble. You're in deep trouble. Because I do think that you're vastly better than the team at home against UCLA at night. I think, or at 2:30. It's not at night. It's at 2:30. I stand corrected. I think you're going to beat South Alabama, and then you have a bye week and then Ole Miss. You cannot go into that Ole Miss game 3-2. It kills all of your momentum. It kills really all the advantages that you have. And let's talk about what happens if BK does lose and this LSU team does lose. You're going to have pitchforks. I understand why you'll have pitchforks. I get it. I get why you would have pitchforks. It's understandable. I might not be there with you because when I call for a head coach's job, I don't mean this in a wrong. There's no ramifications for any of you saying fire Brian Kelly. There's ramifications if I do. Oh, well, Blake's scared. No, I'm not scared. Is that you just have – I've learned that you have a lot of season left. But I understand that it will be another national black eye that you received after what happened in primetime on Sunday in week 1. Guys, we had national media members, guys that I love and respect, Blaine and Jake Crane from Crane and Company, calling into the postgame show. Like, that's the black eye that you had. Of course you went conservative game 1. Of course you did. That's how they perceive you. But you know what? If you go up there and whip that ass, and now what might be a weather environment that seems a little bit better than what it was forecasted of, apparently there's going to be a little bit of sunshine. Maybe it's not going to be as bad as they originally thought. There is no excuses. And even if it does pour rain, there is no excuses. You know why? Because everybody plays on the same field. Now, they have the advantage of knowing how the field is, but that's still no excuse. You'll call for the pitchforks. You 1,000% will call for the pitchforks. So, I want to say something too. I was sent a clip from. Let me start it off like this. Let me start it off better. The guys over at that SEC podcast, Shane and Mike, I love their content. I love it. I love Shane. I think Mike does a good job. Mike said this week on his show, it's a big SEC podcast. I got sent this clip actually yesterday when we were sitting here watching sitting during the storm. Somebody sent me Mike saying that if LSU goes 7-5, Brian Kelly's fired. And he said that he heard that if that happens, he's fired. Let me say two things to that. Number one, I don't believe that, nor have I heard it. And I even try to make some phone calls today in reference to it. Scott ain't firing him, man. It ain't not this. Guys, I really do think that he could lose. He could go 4-8, and they're not going to fire him. Unless a mega booster made, dropped their draws and really did something insane, and you better have the GOAT, Nick Saban, walking through the door right after him. That ain't going to happen neither, because it's just not. Let me ask you this, though. Would you offer Saban $20 million to be the next head coach at LSU? Oh, shit. Miss Terry would never let that happen. I don't think that they'll fire him. Here's another thing. I don't think you're going 7-5. What happens to LSU is people take them to the extremes, right? Everybody talked about how bad LSU was last year. Okay. They did not meet up to standards. They did not meet up to expectations. I get that. To say a team sucks when they had 10 wins, even with a bowl win, I don't give two Rudy Poos. That team doesn't suck. You know what you would be doing right now? What you would be doing right now is if LSU doesn't lose to Ole Miss and they're 10-2, let's just say 11-2. Let's give them a bowl win, because even if they replace Missouri in the Cotton Bowl, they're beating Ohio State. Ohio State's third-string quarterback was in. They're winning that football game. Jaden Daniels, and I'll just tell you this, I have it on very good authority that Jaden Daniels more than likely would have given a massive thought about playing in a New Year's Six Bowl, but that didn't happen. Even with Garrett Nussmeier, I still think that you're beating Ohio State last year with Brian Thomas playing as well. If you're 11-2 coming off a New Year's Six Bowl win, people are having the expectations for you like they did this year to some extent about maybe an Ole Miss, even if you would have lost in week 1. We would have been talking about, and which we probably should be talking about, is how good is USC. So, look, I've spent long on number 4. There's a lot to unpack if you lose that game. Tons and tons and tons of things to unpack in that game. I will tell you that I'm going to pick against LSU, maybe. No, I'm not. I picked LSU on Rufino and Joe show this week. I'm going to pick them here again. But I'm getting to the point where I'm going to be real with you. I want to see him go up here and prove it a little bit too. Like, if I'm being fair and if I'm being honest, I want him to go up here and prove it.